This PowerPoint will give us an overview of the integumentary system. Made of keratinized, stratified squamous epithelium. Deep to the epidermis is the dermis. The dermis is made of two types of connective tissue, and it makes up 80% of the skin. The hypodermis, or subcutaneous layer below the dermis, is a layer of adipose tissue which is not considered a part of the skin. This layer is nonetheless depicted in most illustrations. Notice that most of the accessory structures of the skin, glands, hair follicles, receptors, blood vessels, are found in the dermis. Let's take a closer look at the epidermis. Remember that the tissue that makes up the epidermis is keratinized, stratified squamous epithelial tissue. The keratinized superficial layer of the tissue forms a protective layer resistant to injury. As all epithelial tissue is avascular, the stratified epithelium of the skin forms a thick avascular protective layer. The skin is the first line of defense of the body, and it creates a formidable barrier. The epidermis consists of several distinguishable cell layers. These cell layers are called strata. Histologists use strata to differentiate between thick skin and thin skin. Thick skin is found covering soles of the feet and palms of the hand. Thin skin is found everywhere else. The deepest epidermal strata is the stratum basale or germinativum. The stratum basale consists of one layer of actively dividing germ cells, which can be seen in both thick skin and thin skin. Interdispersed among the germ cells are pigment-producing cells called melanocytes. Melanocytes produce a pigment called melanin. Cells of the stratum basale divide, pushing all their cells to the next superficial strata, the stratum spinosum. Cells of the stratum spinosum are called keratinocytes. As older keratinocytes are pushed to superficial layers, they start to lose their nucleus and organelles and begin to accumulate keratin. The stratum spinosum is found in both thick skin and thin skin. The older cells of the stratum spinosum are pushed to the superficial layers, and as they do so, they lose their nucleus, organelles, and begin to accumulate keratin. Above or superficial to the stratum spinosum is a thin layer of cells that have a granular appearance. The strata is called the stratum granulosum and is found in both thick skin and thin skin. The cells of the stratum granulosum have no nuclei and are accumulating keratin granules. These cells are dying keratinocytes. One of the differences between thick and thin skin is found in the next strata. Superficial to the stratum granulosum, thick skin has a clear layer of dead cells called the stratum lucidum. This layer is not visible in thin skin. The stratum lucidum is made of dead keratinocytes. The most superficial layer in all types of skin is the stratum corneum. This is a layer of dead keratinized cells. Thick skin will have a very thick stratum corneum, while thin skin has a thinner layer of stratum corneum. Make sure you can list the cells of the strata of the epidermis from deep to superficial or from superficial to deep in both thick skin and thin skin. Below the epidermis, there is a thick connective tissue layer called the dermis. The dermis has two layers called dermal layers. The dermal layer immediately deep to the epidermis is the papillary layer. The papillary layer is made of areolar connective tissue. This layer is also called the lamina propria. Areolar connective tissue is rich in small blood vessels that support the avascular epithelial tissue above. The thickest, 80% of the two dermal layers is the reticular layer. Note that the term reticular dermis has nothing to do with reticular connective tissue. The reticular dermal layer is made of dense, irregular connective tissue. This is the dermal layer that gives a structure and strength to the skin, thanks to the thick collagen fibers that are found in this layer. The tissue on the left is areolar connective tissue, which is the tissue found in the papillary layer of the dermis. The tissue on the right is dense, irregular connective tissue, which is the tissue found in the reticular layer of the dermis. Make sure you don't confuse epidermal strata with dermal layers. Epidermal strata are the layers of cells in the epidermis, and their number vary depending on the thickness of the skin. Dermal layers are the two tissue layers in the dermis of the skin. Another skin characteristic which is explored in this chapter is that of a skin color. The main factor in a skin color is the amount of melanin produced by melanocytes. Melanocytes are cells found in the stratum basale. Melanocytes are found in the stratum basale. All persons, regardless of their skin color, have roughly the same number of melanocytes. What changes among different skin colors is the ability of melanocytes to produce a pigment called melanin, not the number of melanocytes. Melanocytes are specialized cells found in the stratum basale. These cells can make a pigment called melanin. These cells secrete melanin in small sacs called melanosomes. Melanosomes are released into the superficial strata, the stratum spinosum. And melanosomes then position themselves above the nuclei of the cells in the stratum spinosum, the keratinocytes. Melanin absorbs UV light. Preventing UV light from damaging the DNA of keratinocytes and causing mutations. The main role of melanin is to protect keratinocytes from the damaging effects of UV light. As you study the chapter, note the conditions related to skin colors mentioned in the chapter. Conditions that may have to do with liver disease, like jaundice, lack of circulation, like cyanosis, excessive circulation, like erythema, lack of melanin, albinism, or excessive accumulation of vitamin A, carotene, which gives skin an orange hue. As you study the chapter, make sure you can identify the variety of glands found in the skin, the touch receptors mentioned in the PowerPoints. Note that lamellated corpuscles are also called Pacinian corpuscles, and light touch receptors are also called Meissner's corpuscles. Know the parts of the hair follicles explained in the PowerPoints: hair shaft, hair root, hair papilla, arrector pillae muscle, and sebaceous glands associated with the hair follicle. Make sure you understand and can list the functions of the skin. Protection from a variety of threats: mechanical, chemical, biological. Thermoregulation via sudoriferous glands and dermal blood vessels. Make sure you understand the role of the skin in hyperthermia, when temperature is increased, or hypothermia, when temperature is low. You should know the location for the myriad of extra receptors, touch receptors, pain receptors, which are also part of the function of the skin. Also, be able to know that the skin is the site where vitamin D production starts. So that is part of the metabolic functions of the skin. Vitamin D synthesis begins at the skin. The skin also acts as a blood reservoir, and it also has a role in excretion via sudoriferous glands, which can excrete waste. Make sure you understand what forms fingerprints as the projections or interlocking of epidermal ridges into dermal papilla. You should also be able to distinguish between the three types of skin burns: first-degree burns, second-degree burns, and third-degree burns. Know the layers of the skin compromised by each burn. Become familiar with the three types of skin cancer mentioned in class. The most common, second most common, and the most dangerous. Know the characteristics of a melanoma lesion, called the ABCD rule. A stands for asymmetric, B for uneven borders, C, two different colors or more, D, diameter, large, greater than 6 millimeters.